Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're diving into a challenge that every elk hunter will face at some point: how to hunt elk who aren't bugling. Now, we've got to be real. When we think about elk hunting, especially archery elk hunting in September, the picture in our heads almost always includes bugles echoing through the timber. We dream about that big bull screaming back at our calls, charging in, and giving us a shot at 20 yards. But if you've spent more than a season or two in the elk woods, you already know that's not always how it plays out. Sometimes the mountains go quiet, the bulls shut up, and suddenly it feels like you're hunting ghosts. I've been there myself, and I know how frustrating it can be. You start questioning your spots, questioning your tactics, and wondering if there are even elk around at all. That silence can eat at you. It can throw a lot of hunters completely off their game. Here's the truth: just because the elk aren't bugling doesn't mean they're not there. It doesn't mean they're unkillable. It just means you've got to change the way you hunt. In this episode, I'm going to break down exactly why elk go silent and how you can still find them, set up on them, and kill them without relying on those big vocal exchanges. This is where woodsmanship, patience, and discipline really separate hunters who fill tags from hunters who go home empty. Let's start with the big question: why do elk stop bugling in the first place, or not start to begin with? If you can understand the why, you can start adjusting your strategy to fit the situation instead of walking around the woods confused and discouraged. The first and biggest reason is hunting pressure. Elk learn fast. On public land, by the second or third week of September, bulls have heard every diaphragm call, every bugle tube, and every hunter crashing through the timber. A bull that bugled his head off on opening week can suddenly go completely tight-lipped when he realizes bugling is drawing danger. Mature bulls especially get cagey. They don't need to advertise. They already have cows, and they're smart enough to know that the more noise they make, the more likely they are to draw a hunter instead of another elk. Second, weather plays a huge role. Hot weather can keep elk quiet because they don't want to exert extra energy during the day. High winds will also shut them down because bugles don't carry well in gusts, and elk rely on being heard by other elk. On the flip side, I've also seen a sudden cold snap throw them off for a few days until the herd adjusts. Elk behavior is tied tightly to conditions, and silence is often just them conserving energy or staying cautious. Third, timing within the rut matters. Early September, the first week, you'll hear younger bulls practicing, possibly, but herd bulls might stay quiet until the cows are in heat. Peak rut, when cows are cycling, is when things can blow up. But outside of that narrow window, don't expect nonstop bugles. Then, once the rut winds down toward the end of September, those bugles are worn out. They've been fighting, breeding, and running ragged for weeks, and they just don't have much left in the tank. Quiet elk at that point are simply conserving themselves. Finally, herd dynamics play into this. If a bull already has a group of cows and feels secure, he doesn't have to advertise. He'll often keep his herd tight, and he might not say a word all day. On the other hand, if cows aren't talking, bulls usually stay quiet too. It's not just the bulls. Sometimes the whole mountain goes silent, and that can be just as frustrating. The key takeaway is this: silence doesn't mean absence. It means you've got to look deeper. Are the elk pressured? Is the weather playing a role? Is it a lull in the rut or post-rut fatigue? Once you can answer that question, you'll know if you should push harder, slow down, or adjust your tactics altogether. This is where a lot of hunters fail. They rely so heavily on bugles to tell them where elk are that the moment it gets quiet, they feel lost. But when you understand why elk go silent, it takes away the mystery. You realize they're still out there, they're just not handing you their location on a silver platter. And that's when you need to start hunting them with your eyes, your nose, and your instincts, not just your ears. When the bugles stop, the woods can feel empty. That's where a lot of hunters pack it in, hike back to camp, and start making excuses about wolves, outfitters, or bad luck. But the hunters who consistently kill elk in quiet years or quiet conditions are the ones who switch gears and start hunting with their eyes and brain instead of just their ears. The truth is, elk leave behind a trail of evidence everywhere they go. If you learn to read it and interpret it correctly, it's like they're still talking. You just have to learn their written language instead of their spoken one. The first skill is learning how to tell fresh sign from old sign. You'll run into rubs that are bleached white from last season, droppings that are hard as a rock and white, or tracks that have dried out. None of that helps you in the moment. When elk go quiet, you can't afford to waste time in stale information. Fresh droppings are moist, sometimes even steaming if you're lucky. They'll be darker and you can usually crumble them easily with your boot. Tracks should have sharp edges in damp soil, and if it rained recently, you can tell whether the track was made before or after the storm. Rubs with wet sap or shavings on them, or shavings on the ground, or even some velvet, that means that bull was there within the last couple of days. Wallow water that's cloudy or muddy means it was used that day. Don't just note the sign. Timestamp it in your mind. Ask yourself, did this happen today, yesterday, or last week? That question alone will keep you from chasing ghosts. Silent elk are still moving between food and bedding and water. Your job is to figure out the routes they prefer. Look for trails with consistent use, ground that's packed, vegetation that's pushed over, or multiple sets of tracks layered on top of each other. Funnels are gold. A saddle between two ridges, a bench halfway up a steep slope, or a narrow strip of timber between meadows can all serve as natural highways for elk. When they're not bugling, you may not hear them coming, but if you're set up along a travel corridor, you don't have to. They'll eventually come to you. Wallows can be another hot spot. Even when bulls aren't bugling, they'll still hit a wallow to cool down or to scent mark and roll around in it. If you find one with fresh mud and tracks around it, that's a prime ambush location. One of the most overlooked skills is reading not just elk sign, but hunter sign. Boot tracks, horse tracks, ATV trails, or camps pitched in obvious spots can all tell you why elk went quiet in the first place. If you're seeing more human tracks than elk tracks, that's a good indicator you need to push deeper, side hill into nasty country, or change elevation. Elk respond to pressure by shifting their movement. They may still use the same general drainage, but they'll move into pockets of dark timber or spots that hunters tend to overlook. Fresh sign just off the beaten path can be the breadcrumb trail that leads you to elk who've gone underground. The hardest part when elk are silent is trusting what the sign tells you. Without bugles to confirm it, a lot of hunters second guess themselves and move on too quickly. But if you found fresh tracks, steaming poop, or water that's been churned up, slow down and commit. Elk are herd animals. They don't just vanish into thin air. Silent elk often circle back through the same areas, especially if food, water, and bedding are close. If the sign is fresh, you're in the game. Set up, move slow, and let patience do the work. When elk aren't bugling, you've got to learn to hunt the ground. Every step you take is either bringing you closer to the herd or pushing them further away. The guys who can read sign like a book don't panic when it's quiet. They know elk are always talking, it's just not with their voices. When elk won't bugle, the way you move through the mountains becomes just as important as where you go. This is where a lot of hunters struggle because the default mode is covering ground quickly, trying to strike a bugle, and then reacting. But when it's silent, you can't bulldoze your way through the timber and expect to bump into a bull. You've got to slow down, way down. Still hunting is exactly what it sounds like. Moving so slow that it almost feels like you're standing still. Elk live in a world of movement, a flick of an ear, the twitch of a tail, the step of a hoof. That's how they notice each other, and that's how they catch you. When you're still hunting, your job is to blend into that rhythm. Take a couple steps. Stop. Scan everything around you with your eyes before moving again. Look through the trees, not just at them. Train yourself to pick out horizontal lines like the back of an elk in a world of vertical timber. I've killed elk at bow range where I first spotted nothing but the glint of an antler tine in the brush. If I'd been moving fast, I never would have seen it. One of the hardest parts of still hunting is mental. You've got to fight that urge to get somewhere. You are somewhere. Every step is a potential shot opportunity. You've got to treat it that way. When you locate fresh sign but don't have eyes on elk, ambush setups can be deadly. Elk are habitual. They use the same saddles, the same benches, the same water sources day after day, especially if hunting pressure hasn't blown them out. Setting up on those travel corridors is one of the best ways to kill a silent bull. Think about saddles between drainages. Elk don't want to burn extra energy climbing straight over steep country if they don't have to. They'll naturally funnel through the lowest point. Benches are another money spot. Those flat spots halfway up a slope where elk stop to feed or bed down, I don't overlook small water holes or seeps in those areas either. In September, even quiet elk need to drink. The key to ambush hunting is wind discipline and patience. If the thermals are shifting, wait until they stabilize before committing. And once you set up, you've got to sit longer than feels comfortable. Elk move on their time, not yours. I've had setups where nothing happened for hours and then out of nowhere, a bull slipped through like a ghost. One of the biggest mistakes archery hunters make is giving up on a spot too soon. You find fresh sign, you set up for 30 minutes, nothing happens, and you move on. The problem is, you might have been 30 minutes too early. Elk often move later than we expect, especially when they're being quiet. If you're confident the sign is fresh, trust the location. Sit longer, hunt slower. I know guys who kill elk every year without ever blowing a bugle. They just know where elk like to travel and they wait them out. That's not luck, it's discipline. Still hunting and ambush hunting often work best when combined. You might still hunt your way along a ridge, reading sign as you go. When you find a saddle littered with fresh tracks or fresh droppings, you don't just keep going. You stop and turn it into an ambush setup. If nothing pans out after a solid sit, you slip back into still hunting mode and continue working through the country. This combination keeps you in the game. You're not just aimlessly wandering. You're methodically hunting your way through elk country and letting the sign dictate when you stop and when you move. When elk won't talk, you've got to hunt like a predator even more. You've got to move more slowly, stay more patient, put yourself in the places elk naturally use, and give them time to show up. If you do that, you'll start seeing opportunities where a lot of hunters only see silence. When bulls aren't bugling, a lot of hunters throw their calls back in the pack and figure they're useless. I get it. Without that back and forth response, calling feels like shouting into the void. But here's the truth. Calling still has a place even when elk aren't vocal. The difference is you've got to scale it back, way back. Think about it this way. If you walked into a room where everyone was dead silent and one person suddenly screamed, it would spook you. But if you heard a quiet cough or someone shifting in their chair, it wouldn't feel threatening. It would just feel natural. That's how elk respond when the woods are quiet. In these situations, subtle cow mews, soft chirps, or a single lost calf sound can do more to reassure elk than a bugle ever could. You're not trying to start a screaming match. You're simply adding a layer of realism to the landscape. I've had bulls come in completely silent to nothing more than a single cow mew every 10 to 15 minutes. No raking, no chuckles, no grunting, just one little note tossed into the air, and suddenly you hear a twig snap behind you, and there he is, slipping in like a ghost. He was curious. The hard part is timing. When elk aren't talking, you have no feedback loop to work with. That's why patience is so critical. If you're going to call, keep it minimal and give it time to work. One of my favorite tactics is what I call the seed call. I'll throw out a soft mew or calf chirp when I settle into an ambush setup, almost like dropping a seed into the ground. Then I go silent. Sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes two. But if there are elk nearby, that sound plants the idea that another elk is in the area, and curiosity is powerful. When you use subtle calling, be ready, because bulls that come to these sounds almost always come in silent. They'll circle downwind, they'll creep through the timber, and they'll test the situation without ever saying a word. This is where elk hunters get busted. They call, they wait, they don't hear anything, so they drop their guard. They stand up, stretch, or move off too soon, and that's when the bull they never knew was coming sneaks in out of the brush. The solution? Stay ready. When you make a call, assume something might be sneaking in. Keep your bow in hand. Keep your eyes scanning downwind. If you don't, you'll educate more bulls than you'll ever get a chance to draw on. When elk go quiet, cow talk will always outperform bugles. A bugle in dead silence often comes across as unnatural or aggressive, but cows are social and soft mews don't raise alarms. If you're going to carry one sound into a silent hunt, make it cow talk. That doesn't mean bugles never work. Sometimes a location bugle in the early morning hours or in the evening will get a response. But during hunting hours when bulls are cagey, cow sounds are your safest bet. The key takeaway is this: calling isn't useless when elk are silent, it just looks and sounds different. You're not out there trying to fire up a screaming match. You're using sound to blend into the herd and to cover your movements. And when you do it right, the elk that show up won't announce themselves. They'll just appear. And that's when you've got to be ready to close the deal. If there's one rule in elk hunting that never changes, whether they're bugling or silent, is this: the wind is everything. Elk live and die by their noses. You can fool their eyes, you can sometimes fool their ears, but you'll never fool their nose. And when the mountains go quiet, this becomes even more critical because you don't have the luxury of calling a bull in fast before he gets your wind. In elk country, thermals dictate everything. In the early morning, before the sun has had a chance to warm up the slope, air is still pushing downhill. As the sun heats up those slopes, currents push uphill. In the evening, as everything starts to cool down again, those same currents reverse and drift downhill again. During midday, in shaded timber, thermals tend to swirl and do unpredictable things, so you've got to be aware of those shifts. Silent elk often move in the shadows or along benches where thermals can be tricky. If you're not paying attention, your scent will reach them before you ever see them. That's why every decision you make, where you hike, where you set up, how you stalk, has to revolve around wind first, elk second. When in doubt, test it out. Drop a few milkweed puffs or puffs on your wind indicator. Don't just assume. Do it often. I've had hunts saved and others ruined because of one bad assumption about thermals. Here's something else to burn into your brain. Silent bulls almost always circle downwind. If you throw out a subtle cow call and a bull decides to come check it out, chances are he's not coming straight in. He's circling wide, testing the wind, trying to smell the elk that he thinks he heard. That means when you set up, you've got a plan for the wind, not just where it is now, but where it will be in 15 minutes. If your wind is blowing in the direction you think a bull might circle, you're already beat. This is why calling setups need to have a downwind blocker, a steep drop-off, a deadfall jungle, or an open meadow that elk are less likely to cross can all help prevent them from scent checking you or sneaking in behind you. If you don't have that, then you'd better adjust your setup until you do. Stealth becomes a weapon when elk aren't talking. You can't rely on noise cover from screaming bugles or pounding hooves. Every twig you snap is amplified in the silence. That's why still hunting requires soft steps, slow movement, and constant awareness of what's under your boots. One tactic I've used is syncing my steps with natural sounds. If the wind gusts, that's when I'll take a couple steps. If a squirrel chatters, I'll use that cover noise to shift my feet. Elk are used to the sounds of the woods. They're not used to a steady two-legged crunch, crunch, crunch. And remember, sometimes the best move is no move at all. If you're in fresh sign and the wind is dicey, it's often smarter to wait than to push. The longer you spend in elk country without blowing them out, the more chances you create. Most hunters don't take wind discipline seriously enough. They play the odds. They hope the bull will slip in before the wind switches. They tell themselves it's good enough, but good enough isn't good enough. Not when you're bow hunting elk, not when elk are silent and cagey. Your entire hunt strategy should be built around keeping the wind in your favor. If that means taking the long way around a ridge, do it. If it means sitting for an extra hour to wait out a swirling breeze, do it. If it means abandoning a setup that looks perfect because the wind doesn't work, do it. Every time you try to cheat the wind, you're just educating elk and making the next encounter harder. When elk won't bugle, the wind becomes your bugle. It tells you where you can and can't hunt. It dictates how elk will move and how you should position yourself. If you respect it, you'll stay in the game. If you ignore it, you won't even know how many elk you've blown out before you ever saw them. When elk aren't bugling, most hunters don't lose the hunt because of their tactics. They lose it because of their mindset. The silence gets in their head. They start doubting their plan, second-guessing every move, and convincing themselves that there just aren't any elk around. Before long, they're back at camp, blaming something like the weather or bad luck. But hunters who succeed in these situations have one thing in common. They stay mentally locked in. They trust the process, keep grinding, and refuse to let the quiet get to them. That's what separates consistent elk killers from everybody else. When elk are bugling, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement. You've got sound to guide you, feedback to work with, and energy pushing you forward. But when it's silent, you've got to generate your own momentum. That means having the patience to still hunt slowly, sit ambush setups longer than feels comfortable, and wait for elk to make the first mistake. Patience doesn't just mean sitting still. It means believing in what you're doing long enough for it to work. Elk hunting isn't about instant gratification. Some of the best hunts I've ever had were grind fests that only came together after many, many days of silence. If you give up too soon, you'll never see those payoffs. Confidence is lethal in the elk woods. When you trust that elk are there, even if they're not bugling, you hunt sharper, you move slower, you notice the details, you stick with a plan long enough to make it work. I can't tell you how many times I've had hunters with me who were ready to bail on a spot because it was too quiet. But I trusted the sign, trusted the country, and said, no, let's give it more time. Hours later, sometimes the very next morning, a bull would slip in silent. Those hunts taught me a valuable lesson. If you believe in what you're doing, you'll stay present and ready when opportunity finally shows up. It's easy to spiral when things are quiet. You start hiking faster, chasing new drainages, or overcalling out of desperation. Every one of those reactions works against you. The solution is to slow down, reset your head, and remind yourself elk don't just disappear. They're always somewhere. And if the sign is fresh, they're close. That mindset will keep you hunting sharp instead of hunting panicked. This is what I love about elk hunting. It's not just a test of skill, it's a test of character. Silent elk hunts force you to rely on grit, discipline, and mental toughness. They force you to hunt because you believe in yourself, not just because the mountains are echoing with bugles. And that carries over into life. When things get quiet, when feedback disappears, when results don't come fast, you either fold or you keep grinding. Hunters who can stay relentless in the silence are the ones who walk out of the woods with meat on their backs. Elk hunts don't fall apart just because bulls stop bugling. They fall apart when hunters stop adapting. Silent elk are still killable elk. If you learn to read the sign, move slow, use subtle calling, respect the wind, and keep your mind locked in, you'll be ready when the opportunity finally shows itself. And if you want to keep sharpening your edge and surround yourself with hunters who refuse to quit, come check out Team Backbone and the membership we offer. That's where you'll find exclusive digital content, backcountry strategy, gear planning, fitness programming, and direct access to me and a community of relentless hunters. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.